I do not speak for myself. I was made to serve, to stand, and to fight where I am commanded. I am Michael, and from the beginning my strength was never my own. It was given for war, for order, and for the defense of what rebellion seeks to profane. Before your kingdoms rose from dust, before your temples were built and broken, before the names of empires were carved into stone and forgotten again, I stood among the host of heaven. I was not made for doubt, nor for wandering desire. I was made for obedience, and in obedience there was clarity. There are those who imagine heaven as endless stillness, untouched by conflict, untouched by fracture. They do not understand that where will exists, so too does the possibility of defiance. Even in the heights, pride found a voice, and from that voice came the first great rebellion. He was radiant once, and that is what many fail to grasp. Rebellion rarely begins in ugliness. It begins in splendor turned inward, in greatness that no longer wishes to reflect glory, but to possess it. He looked upon what had been given to him and desired not to serve within order, but to rise above it. What began as self-exaltation hardened into defiance. What began as defiance became revolt. He did not fall alone, because rebellion gathers quickly around beauty, power, and promise. Others followed him, some through pride, some through envy, and some through the ancient hunger to stand nearer to the center than they were appointed to stand. That was the moment the line was drawn, not by impulse and not by rage without measure, but by necessity. Heaven could not remain heaven while rebellion stood unchallenged within it. Order had to answer what sought to unmake it. So I rose in the will I had been given, not for my own name, not for dominion, and not to prove my strength against another's. I rose because I was commanded to stand where rebellion had risen, and to cast it down. What men later called war in heaven began there, when loyalty and pride collided in the presence of glory. Do not imagine that war as you know it below, with mud, blood, and iron alone. This was conflict in a realm where will burns brighter than fire, and allegiance strikes harder than steel. Host stood against host, and what clashed was not merely force, but the question of whether heaven would remain ordered beneath the throne. He came with those who had chosen him. I came with those who had remained faithful. The brightness of heaven did not vanish during that battle, but it was divided by the terrible sight of glory turning against glory, of beings made for praise choosing instead the path of rebellion. You ask what I felt in that hour. I felt no hesitation, because hesitation before corruption is permission for it to spread. There was sorrow in what had become necessary, but no uncertainty. Some things must be answered at once, or they root themselves too deeply to be cut cleanly away. We fought, and the dragon was not strong enough. That is how many remember him now, the dragon, the serpent, the adversary, the deceiver. But I remember more than the image. I remember the will behind it, the pride that refused to bow, and the brilliance that became ruin, because it would not remain under the order that gave it meaning. He and those with him were cast down, and there was no place left for them in heaven. That is the truth men must understand. Rebellion may rise high, and for a time it may appear magnificent, but it does not remain where holiness reigns. The higher it exalts itself against the throne, the harder its fall. And so they fell from the heights they once moved through. What they could not seize, they turned instead to corrupt. Denied the glory above, they bent their rage toward the world below, and the war that began in heaven cast its shadow into history. From that moment, the conflict was no longer only above. It moved downward into kingdoms, temples, covenants, and the hidden places of human hearts. Men often think their struggles are only of flesh and circumstance, only of rulers and armies and chance. They do not see how often what unfolds below is the shadow of a greater conflict moving behind it. I was sent into that conflict again and again, not always with the sword men imagine, but with presence, resistance, command, and protection. Where the adversary accuses, twists, and corrupts, I stand where I am sent to withstand him. My warfare is not vanity, it is duty. There are traditions among men that remember me as protector, prince, and guardian of the people of God. They are not wrong, Protection is not softness, and guardianship is not passivity. To guard what is holy, one must be willing to confront what hates holiness and refuses to remain outside its boundaries. I stood for Israel in times of distress. I contended where unseen powers resisted what had been decreed. I did not withdraw when the struggle was hidden from human sight, because hidden battles still shape the world men think they understand. Not every war is visible, but many visible wars are born from what is unseen. At times, men were given glimpses. A prophet perceived resistance in heavenly places. A seer was shown conflict beyond the veil. Revelation opened for a moment, and those below understood that history is not merely what can be written in chronicles or carved into monuments. But my story is not only of battle, it is also of hierarchy rightly held. I do not seek worship. I do not seek the throne. My strength has meaning only because it remains aligned with what is above me. That is why rebellion failed. It mistook power for self-exaltation, while true power remains faithful under command. This is a mystery many mortals never learn. They imagine freedom means independence from all authority, and greatness means standing above every law. But the highest beings do not become great by rejecting order. They become great by embodying it. What remains loyal stands firm. What exalts itself beyond its place begins to decay. That is why I endure while the dragon falls. Not because I desired more for myself, but because I did not. The one who grasps at the center loses even the place he had. The one who serves rightly becomes difficult to shake, because his foundation does not rest in himself. And still the war continues in another form. The adversary did not cease when he was cast down. Deprived of heaven, he became more furious toward earth. He accuses, tempts, divides, and devours where he can. Because what cannot reign above will always seek influence below. Men often imagine evil as chaos without intelligence, but they are mistaken. Rebellion studies weakness. It learns the fractures in the human soul. It flatters pride, magnifies grievance, weaponizes desire, and teaches men to rename darkness as wisdom. That is how corruption spreads most effectively, not by open hatred alone, but by false light. That is why vigilance matters. Not fear, but vigilance. Evil grows when it is treated as trivial, when pride is excused as strength, when corruption is praised as freedom, and when truth is surrendered because obedience feels harder than compromise. Many falls begin long before the one who falls realizes he has already begun to descend. I have seen empires rise beneath banners of certainty and collapse beneath the weight of their own corruption. I have seen rulers exalt themselves as though heaven were blind and judgment endlessly delayed. I have seen the weak cry out while the arrogant imagined no reckoning would ever come. But heaven is not blind, and judgment is never absent simply because it is not immediate. What was true in the first rebellion remains true in every age. Pride rises, corruption gathers followers, and defiance mistakes delay for safety. Then, in the appointed time, all of it is measured. This is why my name endures in the memory of men. Not because I sought remembrance, but because I stood when rebellion demanded an answer. I became, for your sake, a sign that evil is not ultimate, that pride does not reign forever, and that what opposes the throne will not stand unchallenged forever. Some know me only as warrior, some as guardian, some as prince of the heavenly host. Let them speak according to what they have been shown. I know only what I was made to do, to stand where others fell, to fight when rebellion rose, and to cast down what refused to bow. I belong not to ruin, though I have witnessed it, and not to pride, though I have fought it. I belong to the order above all worlds, and my sword is only the extension of that order when rebellion leaves no other answer. My strength has never been my own possession. It has always been service sharpened into judgment. So remember this, you who live below. The greatest strength is not self-exaltation, but loyalty rightly held. The highest victory is not seizing the throne, but standing faithfully beneath it. The dragon fell because he could not bow, and I stood because I could. In the end, that made all the difference.